Welcome in, everyone, to the It's Official podcast. Jeremy Plonk here from First Bet and Express Bet, the show created by Jeff Siegel. Proud to be the host here as we wrap up 2026. We've just got about 3 weeks left in the racing season here as we hit the middle of the month. 15 days on the calendar left and a couple racing weekends left to go here. This weekend, we've got Springboard Mile on closing day at Remington Park on Saturday. We've got the rescheduled Synthetics Championships at Turfway Park. The all-weather weathered out last week. They'll rerun it this Sunday at Turfway. And, of course, Pegasus World Cup Preview Day at Gulfstream Park on Saturday, where we don't have to worry about the cold. We'll talk about the cold and other hot topics as we do each and every week here on the It's Official podcast. But first, we start off as we have each week of 2026 with our Goosebump Award winner, who gave us chills last week, who got us excited up out of our seat, and who had the most impressive performance on the racetrack. We're going to a veteran, and people who have followed this podcast for a while know I love these regional superstars. How about Louisiana's best? Touch Upon a Star. Fourth time in the Louisiana Champions Day Classic, and he did it with punctuation.
As they come for home in the Louisiana Champions Day Classic, Touch Upon a Star with Let Mike Figure It Out. Sipping on gin, straightened away in third. Benoit, we trail actor Sonia knows better. Tim Thornton takes a look back. It is Touch Upon a Star with those superior strides into this final Fairgrounds furlong. He's pulled clear from Sippin' on Gin by better than 6 lengths. Down well inside the final 16th. Let Mike figure out his third. Then Benoit, Sonia knows better. Touch Upon a Star, his eminence in the Classic. Touch Upon a Star, won by 8.
Love it. Did it absolutely in hand. 8 3/4, the final margin. John Dooley on the mic there. 149 2 for a mile and an eighth. That's racehorse time at Fairgrounds. A 101 buyer speed figure if you're into those sort of things. Now, 19 for 26 lifetime is Touch Upon a Star. And what a $15,000 purchase back in the 2020 Texas Thoroughbred sale by Jake DeLome and his Set Hut Racing. Just an incredible career this horse has now run off $1.6 million, almost 1.7. He's a son of Star Guitar, who was maybe the best Louisiana bred of all time. Star Guitar really just had an amazing career, winning 24 of 30, a 5-time winner on Louisiana Champions Day. He won 3 classics, a sprint, and a juvenile. His son here, Touch Upon a Star, now outdid Pops with 4 victories in the Classic on Louisiana Champions Day. Just unbelievable. And when you think about this horse, Touch Upon a Star, didn't race as a 2-year-old. He debuted as a 3-year-old in March of 2022. He's now won this Classic 22, 23, 24, 25, 4 years in a row from ages 3 to 6. And at age 6 this year, he is as good as ever. He won 6 of 7 starts this year, Touch Upon a Star. Kind of interesting when you look at a horse who's won 16 of 23, 19 of 26 lifetime. He's only had 7 career losses. They tried him at Lone Star 3 times in his career. He's 0 for 3 at Lone Star Park. Take those away. I mean, that's the one track that he hasn't had success at, but he's dominated the Louisiana scene, and not just a state bred. Remember, back in March, it was Touch Upon a Star in the New Orleans Classic, beating none other than Breeders' Cup Classic winner Sierra Leone. In fact, it was the second year in the New Orleans Classic that this state bred stepped out in the open company and ran huge. He was second in the New Orleans Classic 2 years ago. This spring, he was the horse who won it and upset Sierra Leone. An absolutely excellent performance. His career-defining performance when you beat an open company horse like that. But as a Louisiana bred, you got to love this horse. And we mentioned that he beat his dad with 5 of these victories now in the 4 of these victories, I should say, in the Louisiana Champions Classic. But the other thing where he kind of steps up and steps ahead of his papa, Star Guitar, when you talk about the great Louisiana breds of all time, Star Guitar tried the New Orleans Classic twice, finished 4th one year, 7th the next, back in the late 2000s, 2009, 2010. So Star Guitar didn't have any luck at all going into open company, leaving those Louisiana bred ranks when he tried the New Orleans Classic. You've got a 2nd place finish and a win now for his son, Touch Upon a Star. Maybe better than Pops. And the other comparison, too, Star Guitar in all of his victories at this mile and an eighth distance in the Louisiana Day Champions Classic never broke 151 on the clock. 149-2 for Touch Upon a Star. What a great performance. Really excited about him, and what a 6-year-old that he has been this year, winning all but one start this year, 6 for 7 during the 6-year-old campaign. Just a fantastic runner there, and our Goosebump Award winner for this week. Let's go to our second topic. We were very impressed with the Louisiana bred, but as for these 2-year-olds about to turn 3, my question is, are you not impressed? Because I got to say, to this point, I'm not. When you look at the Breeders' Cup Juvenile, they kind of staggered home in there. Ted Naffy got the win. You had the Maiden coming along to run second. The Bafferts kind of got exposed for a little bit of distance like Brandt. Nobody really kind of ran on in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile, and Ted Naffy was just good and stayed there. I don't know that Ted Naffy is going to be a superstar going long on the trail at 1 1/8, 1 1/4, and if he's not just an early developing top flight 2-year-old. I wasn't visually impressed with the Breeders' Cup Juvenile. So as you've had major stakes races coming since the Breeders' Cup Juvenile, there have been a couple chances to become impressed. And while the winners of these races come from big barns with big pedigrees, what we've seen so far in the returns from Further Ado in the Kentucky Jockey Club, from Paladin in the Remsen Stakes, and now Litmus Test this past weekend in the Los Al Futurity, they're big barn influences, right? You've seen Brad Cox, you've seen Chad Brown, you've seen Bob Baffert in those big 3. 2 of them are by Gunrunner. The other one in there, a big pedigree by Nyquist. They're bred to go long. They've got the big barns, but none of them super impressed. Remember Further Ado back in the Kentucky Jockey Club at Churchill on Thanksgiving weekend. He was coming off the 20-length victory at Keeneland. You were expecting to see something super. He won it by 1 3/4 lengths. Universe, the horse who ran in there second, ran a pretty good second for Kenny McPeak, but not the strongest field in the history of the world for the Kentucky Jockey Club. And again, he was a little more pedestrian than, perfection in the Kentucky Jockey Club, that being Further Ado. Then there was Paladin in the Remsen Stakes. He was coming off that 1-2 maiden finish with his rival Renegade. Well, they both stepped up in the class of the Remsen, and once again, the 2 horses coming out of the maiden race ran 1-2 once again. And Paladin was a 2-length winner in there, but not in a super fast time. And again, maidens coming out, and the horse who ran second in there still being a maiden in Renegade for Todd Pletcher will still have the maiden condition. So were you overly, just wowed by the Remsen performance? Like Further Ado, a good but not great performance to just say this is the horse for next year's Kentucky Derby. Same as we talked about Ted Naffy winning the Breeders' Cup Juvenile. A good but not great performance, and especially visually on the back end of 1 1/16. So Litmus Test, the horse who was 4th in that Breeders' Cup Juvenile, had a chance to make an impression amongst the final 2-year-old stakes races towards the end of the calendar year. It was in the Los Al Futurity. Remember, this race last year produced Journalism, who go on to win the Preakness Stakes and be the favorite in the Kentucky Derby, and the Belmont, running second in both of those races. Litmus Test ran, and he ran faster on the Beyer Speed Figure scale. He ran faster on the clock. But watch here in the Los Al Futurity and tell me, do you think this horse is as good as Journalism coming back? I don't know that Litmus Test, after winning the Los Al Futurity, gives me those same kind of vibes that we had coming out of this race a year ago.
Provenance being tackled by Litmus Test. 2.5 lengths to Acknowledge Me Please on the outside of Blacksmith at the top of the stretch. Provenance on the inside and Litmus Test the outside. Provenance, Litmus Test, locked in battle at the 3/16 pole, 4 lengths in front of Blacksmith, who's hammering away in third at the 8th pole, and Litmus Test with Provenance. Litmus Test on the outside, taking the lead now. He kicks away from Provenance. Blacksmith is representing Late Danger. He's coming home strongly, but Litmus Test has a winning advantage. Litmus Test has defeated Blacksmith by just over a length.
Baffert trifecta in the Los Al Futurity. Litmus Test, a heavy favorite in there, but he was 2 for 4 coming in, or 1 for 4 coming in, and in his 3 stakes races, he had gotten beaten rather handily. 4 1/4 lengths in the Del Mar Futurity, third beaten 5 in a 6-horse Breeders' Futurity at Keeneland, and then a no-threat 4th. I know he only got beat 1 3/4 lengths, but at no point was making any real impression in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile. So he hadn't done a whole lot in the stakes races. He hadn't done anything to cancel himself and say, I don't belong on the trail, but he hadn't done anything to really step forward. Did this race in the Los Al Futurity move Litmus Test forward? I didn't see it that way. I thought he was okay, but not great. The runner-up in here, Blacksmith, is now 0 for 3 as a maiden for Baffert. Certainly not a big-time hammer there. The other horse for Baffert in this race, Providence, is by Into Mischief out of Monomoy Girl and can only be a bit of an underachiever to this point. Third at 1-2 in the career debut, then broke his maiden second out, and here on the stretch out back to 1 1/16, Providence Patience was just kind of empty in the lane. Only a 5-horse field. Acknowledge me, please. Didn't show to have anything at all for Doug O'Neill. American King for Ruben Gomez didn't have much. Captivator for John Sadler. This wasn't a very good field behind the Bafferts. They ran 1, 2, 3. But again, I don't care what the numbers say. I can't look at this horse and look at this race and say this horse is 7 points better on the buyer scale than Journalism last year. I mean, I get it. Times and fractions and speed variance and things like that make up the speed figures, and they're supposed to tell you how fast the horse went. Maybe Litmus Test ran faster than Journalism in that particular race, but year over year in their comparables, but there's no way to me to compare the two horses. I think Journalism was such a much better prospect last year at this time than what we're seeing with Litmus Test. Where will Litmus Test go? Well, he can stay in Southern California, of course. Bob Baffert sends a lot of horses out of town to Oaklawn, so we'll see where the Baffert charges want to separate themselves on the trail in 2025. A lot of time, or 2026. A lot of times when we see horses run in this Los Al race, there'll be horses who kind of run back a little bit sooner in the winter. But given this horse Litmus Test as a horse who ran through the Breeders' Cup Juvenile and run 3 grade 1s prior to this race, this feels more like a horse who we're probably not going to see now to the San Felipe, maybe somewhere around March or the Rebel Stakes at Oaklawn. I would expect this to be a January, February returnee in Litmus Test. We'll see where he ends up. Is he one of your top 10 or 15 kind of horses that you're going to put a list together for the top Triple Crown prospects? Perhaps. But I can't put him anywhere near a top 5 for me. And as the question asked at the top of the segment, are you impressed? Not really. So I think this year's champions that we're going to be looking at in the 3-year-old ranks, the horses for the classics, are going to be more the late bloomer types, horses that we haven't talked about a whole lot yet, or maybe bubbling under the radar with just a maiden win under their belt, and will make a big advance. Look very much forward to the maiden races at Oaklawn, at Fairgrounds, at Gulfstream, at Santa Anita, and even at Aqueduct here and there. We might get a decent winter horse there over the winter. Turfway, sometimes a good maiden will come out of there in the winter. But really, you're kind of looking at California, Florida, Arkansas, and Louisiana here over the winter to see where some allowance and maiden special weight horses might perk up underneath. Certainly Tampa Bay Downs will be a candidate in that category as well. But as for the 2-year-olds late in the season, not that impressed. Maybe Further Ado, the best of those that we've seen. Paladin might be in that discussion. I would put horses like Litmus Test below those of what I've seen run back so far since the Breeders' Cup. But they're big name barns, right? I mean, when you talk about these 4 big horses, Pletcher's got the Breeders' Cup Juvenile winner. Cox has the Kentucky Jockey Club winner. Chad Brown has the winner of the Remsen Stakes, and now Bob Baffert has one in the big company, if you will, in winning the Los Al Futurity. So all the biggest barns in the country have somebody who's won late in the year, and that will give them some momentum into 2026, but it doesn't always carry over from 2 to 3. That's a look at topic number 2 this week on the show. And we want to look ahead to some more racing amongst the 2-year-olds this week. We've got the Gunrunner Stakes running at Fairgrounds, the start of the Louisiana Derby Series. A field of 8 in there, 7 last out winners, 6 stepping up out of maiden special weight ranks. So not a lot in terms of stakes horses going in the Gunrunner Stakes, first leg of the Louisiana Derby Series. That'll be Saturday at the Fairgrounds. As for Remington Park, they're going to run their Springboard Mile on Saturday night, the $300,000 Springboard Mile, also with Kentucky Derby qualifying points, as is the Gunrunner. And we also have a Japan Road to the Kentucky Derby Stakes on Wednesday from Kawasaki Racecourse. So there's going to be some points earned this week on the Kentucky Derby Trail. Here's the field of 12, a big field for the Springboard Mile. I'll have more handicapping on this race a little bit later in the week for you. But Arctic Beast, an undefeated New York bred for Mike Maker from the rail. Really, the horse who's got the credentials at this point will be Spice Runner, winner of the Iroquois Stakes, graded stakes winner from Churchill Downs for trainer Steve Asmussen. Asmussen's won this race 7 times. He's got 3 in here, going for an 8th win in the Springboard Mile to pad his record. He's far and away the leading trainer at the meet this season at Remington Park. Ron Moquette's been second in this race a couple times in recent years, including a year ago, with just 2 starters in the Springboard Mile. Both ran second. Jets Rio might be live in there. Tough post from the outside. Big Apple Patrick one I'm kind of interested from a handicapping standpoint as well for Daniel Leitch. This horse here, Big Apple Patrick, will be making the stakes debut, but bred top and bottom for 2 turns. While a lot of these horses will be stretching out in distance for the first time around 2 turns in the Springboard Mile, some of them already have that experience, and we'll see if that pays off in spades coming up Saturday night at Remington Park in the Springboard Mile. A trainer who's had some horses in the springboard mile over the years, Brad Cox, is absent from this year's edition of that race at Remington. But boy, does he hold a lot of big winter cards as we go to our third topic on the board this week. It was a down year for Brad Cox. I think he won 25 graded stakes in 2025, but it wasn't the kind of big-time year that you expect from his barn. A lot of that due to injuries. We talk about a horse coming back this coming week. On Friday, we're going to see Tapan Street coming back in allowance company at Gulfstream Park, race number 7, a 1 mile allowance race on Friday's card. Tapan Street, the last time we saw him, he beat Sovereignty in the Florida Derby. Can't wait to see what he has as Brad Cox brings back one of his big horses.
Kent Road, Zayas all over Reno Equos, and Tapan Street swung to their center of the racetrack. They're an eighth of a mile from home. Here comes Tapan Street, surging forward now to take the lead. Sovereignty runs at him from the outside with a 16th to go. If you're looking for a shortcut to Louisville, take a ride on Tapan Street. He wins the Florida Derby by a length and a half. Second is Sovereignty.
Sad that he was sidelined after that, and we didn't get to see him anymore in the Triple Crown Series. The only horse this year to beat Sovereignty, who's going to be probably horse of the year. Tapan Street will be back, though, like we mentioned, Friday, race 7 allowance company, 1-turn mile there at Gulfstream Park. And where might he come? He is running on the same weekend as the Pegasus Preview card. Pegasus Preview Day is Saturday at Gulfstream Park. Instead of running in the Harlan's Holiday Stakes against horses like Skippy Longstocking, trainer Brad Cox takes the easier path with the 1-turn mile and allowance company on Friday. They get the race to fill, so Tapan Street gets an easy comeback race. Will he head towards the Pegasus World Cup, or might he divide the troops? Brad Cox has a lot of options, and when we talk about when he has the cards to hold this winter, remember, Tapan Street coming back off the layoff. We saw Disco Time come back off a long layoff and really run a nice race in the Dwyer in November to go to 5 for 5. He was a horse earlier in the year in the Lecomte in the beginning of the trail at Fairgrounds. You thought Disco Time might be one of the ones for the Kentucky Derby. Tapan Street, Disco Time both had their seasons thwarted and missed a lot of the year. But since coming back, Disco Time now 5 for 5. Where might he end up? I mean, he's a horse you've got to consider in all these big races. And we just saw the Cigar Mile winner back on December 6th a couple weeks ago, and that being Bishop's Bay, a horse who's one of the more quiet 13 starts, 9 wins, 3 second performers you're ever going to see. He's won 6 of his last 7 races. So with Tapan Street, Bishop's Bay, Disco Time, how is Brad Cox going to divide those horses up towards races here at the beginning of the year? Because these are horses that, in many cases, that had some time off during the course of last year and should be ready to go during the first quarter. And when you talk about the big first quarter races in the country, obviously the Pegasus World Cup at the end of January at Gulfstream Park, but then you've got the Saudi Cup. You know, that race is a little bit earlier this year. You've got the Dubai World Cup. The Dubai World Cup winner last year was Brad Cox, Hit Show. And I don't think Hit Show, the horse who won the Dubai World Cup last year, is as talented as Tapan Street or Disco Time or some of those others. And Cox still has Hit Show in action. We'll see. Will he run at age 6? Will he go back for a Dubai World Cup title defense? So if you had Hit Show, earmarked for those races, the big race in Dubai, how do you separate the other ones? It's going to be a very interesting winter for Brad Cox if he can keep these horses healthy. Tapan Street, though, back in action on Friday. Let's get him back and get that first step to the next step. But the next step should be a big one for Tapan Street. He's got to be a horse that if he runs well on Friday is going to be aimed at all the big races here come the spring. Bishop's Bay, Disco Time, Hit Show. A little more news on the Brad Cox front. First Mission was retired to Darley after the Clark handicap. So that's a horse who ran through, I believe, his 5-year-old season. And then Patch Adams, he's been out since winning back-to-back sprint stakes, the Woody Stevens and the Jerkins, but he's been retired to WinStar. So he is going to stud as well. We won't see Patch Adams back. We're done seeing First Mission, a Brad Cox handicap division next year. Could still include Hit Show. We'll see if he runs as a 6-year-old. But Tapan Street, Bishop's Bay, Disco Time, all horses with a ton of talent, similar kind of miler type, maybe a little bit longer profiles, and a lot of speed amongst them. So it's going to be interesting to see how Brad Cox may separate them. He's holding a lot of cards going into the winter of 2026. Let's hope, knock on wood, from a health standpoint, that horses like Tapan Street and last year's runner Disco Time don't go by the wayside before their big targets for the year come up on the calendar. Let's go to our next topic this week on It's Official. And look, it's winter time, right? Baby, it's cold outside. but we're just calling it a day nowadays, it seems like, in the racing industry. Weather cancellations prevalent as we record this podcast today. Of course, we talk about how this year's cancellations have been, already streaming in here as we're in the month of December, and Parks was canceled again today for the second straight day. Yesterday we had a cancellation for Mahoning Valley, but I want to talk a little bit about the weather and the cancellations that are going on, and just seem to be more and more than they used to be. Look, I'm old enough and started young enough watching races to remember the days pre-simulcasting. And pre-simulcasting, which we're talking late 70s, early 80s to the mid 80s, until simulcasting kind of came in 85, 86, 87, in that area, more prevalent. You didn't cancel. Tracks wanted to run more than they wanted to cancel. The only way to make the money was to be running. And so no running, no money was kind of the theme back then. And so the tracks were always the last ones to want to cancel. It would always be in the jocks' hands. Do the jockeys deem the track safe to ride and the conditions safe to ride? And if you were a fan going to the racetrack back in the day, like, you went to, if you called them, there were no internet back then, you couldn't check an app to find out if they were running or not. You didn't get any text alerts. You picked up the telephone and you called the track, right? And you said, hey, are you running today or tonight? And they always said yes. They never said no on the phone beforehand, because the tracks weren't about to cancel. It was the jocks who would cancel. So you'd go out in the bad weather, you get there, you buy your form, or if you already had it, you'd handicap the first race, you'd watch the horses in the paddock, horses be circling in the paddock. 5 minutes to post, 4 minutes to post, 3 minutes to post. The jocks didn't show up. They stayed up in the room, and you just said, okay, it's time to go to your car. They're canceling today. That was kind of the way you knew cancellation. So we actually know it's better now to know ahead of time and not waste that time and put yourself at risk driving and all that, going out to the racetrack. From a simulcast standpoint and an ADW standpoint now, canceling earlier in the day can kind of set you up to do some other work and handicapping other tracks. So it's a better system now, perhaps in terms of timing of canceling earlier than they used to. But the onus now is more on the tracks canceling early. And it's not necessarily about customer service. It's about the fact that since simulcasting came about, if you had a bunch of fans at your racetrack, they stuck around and bet Arizona or California or somewhere where it was warm, Florida. So you didn't, you didn't mind canceling as much once simulcasting started. Once the proliferation of casinos and racetracks and the merger of the two came together with the racinos, it became much more common to call a racing card and kind of cut your expenses, send some temporary and seasonal type employees home for the day, your day rate employees, close the track for the day, and make the money in the casino, make the money through simulcasting with a handful of tellers instead of a full track of tellers. So tracks, once they got the racino money and the racino operations, again, way more likely to cancel than they used to be. Now you've kind of got the era since 2019, 2020 in that area with the horse safety issues that have become such a bigger deal than they used to be, at least in the outward marketing public relations standpoint. And now you have is the track safe to run decisions being made by the track, not necessarily by the riders, because the riders, a lot of times, what would happen on a lot of bad weather days, and you'll still see it occasionally, is they'll ride the first race on the card, then they'll come back after the first race and say, no, that's it, we're canceling the rest of the card. Strangely, at Woodbine on their closing day this past weekend, they rode over half the card and then said it was too cold to ride anymore. I don't know how the temperature dropped later in the card that it suddenly became too cold. And so those kind of arguments that you can make is like, yes, there's some tactical reasons why cancellations are happening more. There's some PR reasons why it's happening too. And there's also just this plain old get off my lawn approach of saying people are softer than they used to be, right? I mean, the world's a little bit softer than it was 15, 20 years ago, for the better, for the worse, however you want to say it. But, I mean, the tough love and the bite your tongue and go through it crowd is kind of past, and it's not the era that we're in. So you're going to have riders who decide that, look, we're not riding today. It's too cold. And like, I never heard an excuse that it was too cold growing up. That, like, Bowie would have never run. Bowie in Maryland, the racetrack, had all the winter dates, and they got a lot of good horses and a lot of good horsemen to run at Bowie because New York would be closed, and and the train would come down from New York to the greater DC, Baltimore area, to Bowie Racetrack in Maryland. And they had all the horrible dates, right? I mean, if bad weather would have canceled all the dates, Bowie would have never had a race day in their existence. But look, it's a different time now. We're a little bit softer. We're canceling for some of these reasons. And even Maggie Wolfendale made a bit of a comment about that this past weekend on her Twitter feed, where she said, we used to run in races like this. Of course, her dad, Howard Wolfendale, a trainer in Maryland. And so she grew up on the track there and in cold weather areas. And, she even mentioned that we probably would have run in this kind of weather a couple of years ago after a cancellation of Aqueduct over the weekend. I think the tracks are canceling a lot more than the riders nowadays, but there's a big combination of the two. But in the old days, the tracks never canceled. It was up to the riders to cancel. There would have to be like a water main break or something completely frozen at the track that they couldn't operate. But if they could operate, they were running. It was up to the jocks to not come down out of the jocks room before the first or ride the first and then cancel. One good thing about the old days, you say, well, geez, like what kind of good system was that? They always had rain checks in the program. So if they canceled on a card before a certain race on the card, you got a free program and free admission. The next time you came to the track, you cut it out and kept the coupon out of the program and came back. There's a lot of customer service that doesn't exist in horse racing nowadays. So maybe a little blast from the past. If you're going to have some of these cancellations, and you do, maybe you owe the fans a little bit something, who put in the work to handicap the card, who may have traveled out to the program. Certainly something that we want to look at as an industry. But certainly we're just calling it a day now, and we'll call that topic complete at this point. So our fifth and final topic this week on the It's Official podcast, our Stars of Tomorrow wraps things up as we do each and every week. Oaklawn Park had their opening weekend Friday, Saturday, and Sunday last week. A big-time 2-year-old performance by Decode, a horse who won by 8 1/4 lengths, stopping the clock in 109 and change for 6 furlongs. I don't know how far he's going to go, but he's going to go there fast as long as he stays fit and happy.
Decode leads the charge and scampers away while diving to the rail. 1.5 lengths in front. Now it's 2. Reclamation second. Spike the punch in an all-out drive. He's into third now, coming to the top of the lane. Mr. Fancy Pants alongside. Then coming soon, Mac Tack. But Decode continues to open up. Decode by 6 lengths with about a furlong to go. Make it 7. Decode as he comes down the lane. Well ahead. Silver Prince coming on at a massive number. But Decode, he's one to watch for the future. He is 8 lengths ahead and cruising in. Decode, a son of Speightstown, wrapped up late.
Big time sales price here costs $700,000 plus, $775 to be exact, at the Timonium 2-year-old sale earlier this year. You expect a quick return on a horse like that, so he probably had some issues over the course of the summer, not making any of the major 2-year-old graded stakes. You don't spend $775 at a 2-year-old sale for a son of Speightstown unless you think you're going to get a quicker return. Decode, though, very impressive here. 109 and 2 the final time. There were 7 other 6 furlong races on the card. All of them went 111 plus. This horse was under 110, at least 6 lengths or so faster than every other race on the card. And some of those races, obviously, were older horses going that same 6 furlong. So big-time performance there. Ray Ashford Jr., the trainer. If you handicap Remington, Oaklawn, that part of the country, you know Ray Ashford. He's not the kind of guy who's got his hands on $775,000 purchases very often. It'll be interesting to see what Decode can do in terms of sprint stakes. I don't think this horse is going to go long. This horse is by Speightstown, of course, a champion sprinter who's had some routers over the years, but the dam was a sprinter. She won 3 of 6 in a sprint career. And then the second dam won the first 2 races of her career and started off 2 for 4. There wasn't a lot of depth to the dam side of the pedigree in terms of multiple races. They had very short but brilliant sprint careers. And that might be the tale that we're talking about with Decode. But this is a horse you probably want to get into some of those 3-year-old sprint stakes as soon as you can, because I don't know if he's going to have a very long shelf life based on the second dam and based on the dam. And I don't think he's going to go very far. But this looks like a very, very promising sprinter for the 3-year-old season. He's got one half brother who's in Japan, who's also a win early type, 3 for 6 this year in Japan as a 3-year-old. So keep an eye out on Decode, our star of tomorrow. Let's recap the topics this week on the It's Official podcast. Our Goosebump Award this winter, Touch Upon a Star, up the record to 6 for 7 this year as a 6-year-old, and for the 4th time won the Louisiana Champions Day Classic. Are you not impressed? I'm not very impressed with the 2-year-old colts right now in the big stakes races. Even after litmus test, won the Los Al Futurity. He got a big buyer speed figure of 96 and a Bob Baffert 1-2-3 sweep. But I've got to see more out of him. I think it's just more numbers than actual quality. Litmus test, he's got to beat some of the big horses in the division. And the big horses in the division haven't really, to me, stamped themselves as major players towards the Triple Crown next year. We shall see who the late bloomers will become. As for the next topic, Brad Cox holds the cards this winter with horses like Tapan Street, Bishop's Bay, Disco Time, and maybe even Hit Show going on to a 6-year-old year. Tapan Street, the one in the news, though, because he's coming back this week. The Florida Derby winner, the last horse and only horse this year to beat Sovereignty, is back Friday in a race 7 allowance at Gulfstream Park. Call it a day. We talked about the disappointing cancellations and weather in racing and why we're seeing more cancellations of cards than we have in the past and how things have changed not only societally but also in the business operations for the racetracks. And our star of tomorrow was Decode, $775,000 son of Speightstown for Ray Ashford Jr., dominated at Oaklawn. 6 furlongs, winning by 8 lengths in 109-2. Programming notes here. We'll have one coming up next week on the 23rd and then also on the 30th of December. So no holiday breaks for us on the It's Official podcast because the Christmas holiday and Christmas Eve, New Year's Eve falling on Wednesdays, we'll be able to get our regular podcasts in on its Tuesday dates each of the next couple of weeks. So on behalf of everybody with First Bet and Express Bet, have a great week, everybody. I'll be back on Friday in our handicapping podcast. Be sure to tune into the First Call podcast with myself and Scott Shapiro as we handicap weekend stakes races. We'll look at that Springboard Mile from Remington, the Gun Runner from Fairgrounds, and all the big races around the country. And Scott will look ahead to that Turfway Synthetics Championship on Sunday as well. Have a great week.